Good evening, you're watching World News Tonight on TVP World. I'm Aaron Darman. NATO will continue to defend every inch of its territory. This from the alliance's top brass as it unveils the so-called Eastern Sentry mission to beef up defences along the border with Russia. As we go to air tonight, these are our top stories. Emotions run high as political prisoners in Belarus return home. Moldova faces Russia's battle for influence. And Poland issues advice for citizens in case of a crisis. The largest concentration of violations of NATO airspace. That's how Secretary-General Mark Rutte is describing Moscow's drone incursion over Polish skies earlier this week, while stopping short of calling it a deliberate deployment. It comes as NATO unveils a new defence mission along the eastern flank, with Poland and the Baltics also restricting airspace near the Russian border. Defence correspondent Zuzana Jurek reports.
NATO is launching Eastern Sentry to bolster our posture even further along our eastern flank. This military activity will commence in the coming days and will involve a range of assets from allies including Denmark, France, United Kingdom, Germany and others. In addition to more traditional military capabilities, this effort will also feature elements designed to address the particular challenges associated with the use of drones.
The initiative, according to NATO Supreme Commander Alexis Grynkevich, is bound to include
additional enhanced capabilities. It will integrate air and ground-based defenses, and it will increase information sharing amongst nations. Foremost, it will even further strengthen our posture to shield and protect the alliance.
This comes just 2 days after Poland experienced the biggest incursion into its airspace from Russia, as 19 drones flew over its territory.
This was Russia trying to put the NATO defenses under question, trying to test the Polish response and trying to test both the military and political response.
On a bilateral level, Poland too is leading in efforts to bolster its border defences, focusing on drone capabilities, including joint Polish-Ukrainian training.
In response to questions about the location of planned drone training and cooperation between experts from Poland and Ukraine, we would like to report that advanced talks are currently underway between specialists from both countries regarding in-depth cooperation in the field of drone and anti-drone systems. All of these efforts are to take place in Poland.
Bolstering the eastern flank's capabilities was not the only response, however, as the Baltics and Poland moved to restrict air traffic along its eastern borders. Following Poland and Latvia's immediate response, Estonia moved to partially close off its airspace on Friday. Lithuania already declared a no-fly zone along its 56-mile border with Belarus back in mid-August. For now, these restrictions are meant to run from a couple of weeks up to as late as December, though potential extensions have already been floated.
This prevents someone from the other side flying in an aircraft below the radar and dropping people off and flying. So it prevents incursions. It sends that kind of a signal. So it says, don't try that.
At the same time, the pre-planned closure of the Polish-Belarusian border kicked in late Thursday night.
The decision is entirely about Polish security and will remain in effect as long as necessary. The measure was put in place in connection with the Zapad military exercises, which are already underway. These drills are aimed directly at Poland and the European Union and include scenarios practicing aggressive war against our country.
These land, air and naval exercises are spread across 12 sites in Russia and Belarus. According to official announcements, the number of troops involved is not meant to exceed 13,000. Lithuanian intelligence services have confirmed, however, that previous estimates of 30,000 troops are more accurate.
If you look at the numbers compared to the previous exercise, which was around 200,000, the numbers look anemic, but it's very dangerous. But the proximity is bound to be something that's combustible.
Particularly as Poland and its NATO allies are too demonstrating their defensive capabilities with the Iron Defender 25 exercises. Involving more than 30,000 soldiers and 600 vehicles and artillery systems, the exercise is held across main training centers, as well as the Baltic Sea, Polish airspace and cyberspace. For TVP World, Zuzana Jurek.
For 2 days, Donald Trump remained largely quiet and vague in his response to Russia's aerial violation. Now, the US president has both suggested it could be a mistake and that he's losing patience with Vladimir Putin and will need to come down strongly. So, is Europe's transatlantic partner undermining NATO unity? Kazimierz Wysiak has more.
Could have been a mistake.
This was definitely not what Warsaw or any other European capital wanted to hear from the biggest NATO member, after close to 20 Russian drones violated Poland's airspace this week. Top Polish officials took to social media to point out what they believe is obvious, including Prime Minister Donald Tusk.
We would also wish that the drone attack on Poland was a mistake, but it wasn't, and we know it.
Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski.
No, that wasn't a mistake.
And Deputy Defense Minister Cezary Tomczyk.
President Trump, thank you for your attention to last night's events. Let me be clear, this was not a mistake. 1 or 2 drones might be seen as an error, but 19 launched from Russian-controlled territory was an intentional attack on Poland and NATO's eastern flank.
In an interview with Fox News on Friday, the United States leader offered even more vague comments.
I mean, I'm not going to defend anybody, but the Poland's, they were actually knocked down and they fell into an area. But you shouldn't be close to Poland anyway.
Right.
So I solved, as you know, 7 wars. 7.
The brag about ending wars was quickly followed by another comment on losing patience with the Russian president.
Yeah, it's sort of running out and running out fast. But it does take 2 to tango. But we're going to have to come down very, very strong. It's the only one. This is the one, because I've always had a great relationship with Putin. This is the only war that I haven't solved.
The lack of tangible action from the US president stands in stark contrast to the immediate reactions from Poland's European allies.
NATO is a transatlantic relationship. You could have European unity, but that's not NATO unity. NATO unity has to have both sides, the key powers on both sides of the Atlantic.
Trump's long-taunted secondary sanctions on China and India, 2 of Russia's biggest energy clients, are still in the realm of preparations.
It's a blatant test of it, and right now we're not passing that test. Passing that test is easy to do. It would take a snap of a finger. It would just take a little leadership from President Trump to all of a sudden get the transatlantic community to impose massive, body-slamming economic sanctions to shut down Russia's war economy.
Trump's reluctance to at least express unity with Poland and condemn the provocation from Moscow is now putting the very concept of NATO into question.
Well, we would all wish that Donald Trump would shift his narratives more towards a clear blame on Russia rather than his game of ambiguity. But again, we have witnessed it for many, many months now.
For TVP World, I'm Kazimierz Wysiak.
Free at last. Emotional scenes have greeted the 52 political prisoners released by Belarus, a swap in return for lifting sanctions on its national airline Belavia. Washington sent a delegation to Minsk to negotiate the deal, with Alexander Lukashenko even gifted cufflinks from the White House. Anastasia Yanchenko reports.
Natasha, my daughter, I haven't seen you in 5 years. Natasha, I can finally come home and see you.
52 political prisoners held in Belarusian prisons have finally been freed and returned home. The list includes 3 Polish citizens as well as individuals from Latvia, Lithuania, Germany, France and the United Kingdom.
I'm incredibly happy that I'm free, because living in captivity in a penal colony was a nightmare.
Among those released are ordinary citizens, as well as intellectuals, opposition figures, and numerous journalists. Some of them worked for Warsaw-based Belsat TV, and Polish diplomats campaigned relentlessly for their release.
At the colony, they use the cold to torture you. I spent 8 months in solitary confinement in a very cold cell. The administration of the colony and the staff were terrible.
The release of political prisoners seems to be a goodwill gesture prompted by the second visit of high-level U.S. officials to Belarus, this time led by John Cole. In return, President Lukashenko secured the lifting of U.S. sanctions on Belavia, the country's flag air carrier.
What the goal here is to normalize relations between the United States and Belarus. We're not going to interfere with his relationship with Putin. That's not our game.
At the end of the meeting, Lukashenko also received a letter from the White House containing best wishes for the Belarusian president from Donald and Melania Trump. Beyond the letter and sanctions relief, the Belarusian leader also received a gift, cufflinks from the White House.
And as I was leaving the Oval Office with that, he said, "Come back, don't forget, I have these for him."
As a motivation for Trump, Lukashenko is truly an interesting and valuable resource, and Lukashenko presents himself as a person who understands this, as someone who can give Putin certain ideas or obtain information from Russia.
However, not all political prisoners have been freed by Belarus. And for some of those released on Thursday, it was a forced deportation. Among them is Mykola Statkiewicz, one of Lukashenko's key political opponents, who refused to leave Belarus following the release and has since disappeared, with his wife unable to reach him. His disappearance is highly concerning for the Belarusian opposition.
People in masks took him away, and apparently he was formally pardoned. But in Belarus, all these formalities and laws mean nothing. He could very well end up back behind bars. He even faces the threat of physical elimination.
Over 1,000 political prisoners still remain behind bars in Belarusian jails.
President Trump has set minimal goal. All 1,300 must be released. We will continue to work with the US administration and our allies in Europe to make sure that releases continue.
This report for TVP World by Anastasia Yanchenko.
Moldova is a country with less than 3 million people, sharing a border with Ukraine and Romania. It's also a country facing a high-stakes parliamentary election later this month, which could be pivotal for its EU path. But as our Balkans correspondent Paweł Trzaskowski reports, Russia's circle of influence won't give up without a fight.
European Union flags adorn the streets of Chisinau, the capital of Moldova, a country that aims to become a member of the bloc in 5 years. But a statue of Lenin still stands near the city's main recreational area. Not that much of a paradox, given the current divisions in Moldovan society. Moldova is a country of no more than 3 million people, bordering Ukraine and Romania. But despite its small size, it's home to one separatist region, Transnistria, and one autonomous one, Gagauzia. I travelled south to Comrade, the capital of the latter. And Gagauzia is openly pro-Russian. In last year's EU accession referendum, almost 95% of all the votes cast were against Moldova joining the European bloc. I go to the local town hall to talk to Sergei Anastasov, the mayor of the region's capital. In his office, he also keeps flags of the European Union.
Is it difficult to be a pro-European mayor in a city like Comrade?
Yes, it's a bit difficult.
Why? How is it difficult?
But I'm the free time, and in 10 years I'm the mayor here.
Anastasov shows me the most recent investments in the region. Muddy roads in the city centre are now paved. Children go to modern schools, but local society is very slowly warming up to the idea of joining the European bloc. One of the reasons behind this stalwart support for Russia here is widespread corruption and state capture in Gagauzia.
The special about this region is that it is totally controlled by pro-Russian political forces, and more than that, it is totally controlled by organized criminal group.
And the man behind this system is fugitive oligarch Ilan Shaw, now hiding from the Moldovan justice system in Russia.
He is also responsible for destabilization of the Republic of Moldova.
in Russia, beyond the reach of Moldovan law enforcement, Shaw created the so-called Shaw network, which is being used to orchestrate voting fraud schemes.
It wasn't a one-time thing. He had people who were organizing things or getting monthly salaries.
But Russian interference in Moldovan elections goes beyond mere corruption. Dumitru Tira, founder of the Realitatea press group, tells me that there are at least 3 layers of these actions: disinformation, propaganda and cyber attacks. And one of the main purposes of these attacks is
to decrease the credibility of the institution, of the process itself. And it's not only about the process here in Moldova. Also, one of the issues is definitely the vote and the electoral process in diaspora.
Tira shares with me a clip that was released the same day. His own outlet was used to spread disinformation. And I'm told that the Kremlin's efforts are only expected to intensify as the date of elections draws closer, precisely because these elections will either keep Moldova on the pro-EU path or push it back into Moscow's grip.
Without a stable majority in the parliament, a pro-European majority in the parliament, our accession process to the EU will be endangered.
Reporting from Moldova for TVP World, I'm Paweł Trzaskowski.
In the wake of Russian drones entering NATO airspace, Poland's Interior Ministry is issuing advice on how citizens can respond in the future and be better prepared for unexpected threats. Maciej Wilowski has more.
Authorities in Poland are advising citizens on how to respond to aerial and hybrid threats. Poland's Interior Ministry Office for the Podlasha region, located in northeastern Poland along the Belarusian border, issued a statement in response to recent drone strikes.
The ministry urges residents to stay calm, actively monitor communications from national authorities, and not fall victim to emotional distress, manipulation, and disinformation. Authorities ask residents to steer clear of debris from objects of unknown origin, avoid touching and moving these objects, and to inform uniformed personnel about these sightings.
The regional government of Lubusz region in western Poland issued its own advice on handling drones.
It doesn't matter whether it's a civilian or military drone. Report it to the authorities. There are well-trained military units and police pyrotechnics who can examine these objects and determine whether or not they are dangerous. I repeat, let's leave it to the professionals and not make any rash decisions.
While there were no casualties or injuries during Wednesday morning's drone strikes, crashing drones can pose a significant risk to civilians.
So we had for sure 2 types of drones, so decoy drones and drones that most likely were armed. Decoy drones are not armed. Doesn't mean that they do not pose a threat or no risk to the civilians, because they fly with significant speed. Because of that and because of their weight, they do pose significant kinetic power.
While thankfully no lives were lost during the recent drone strikes in Poland, it's always best to be prepared and respond appropriately in case of similar incidents in the future. For TVP World, I'm Maciej Wilowski.
And staying with our top story now, the fallout of Moscow's aerial incursion on Polish airspace. Joining me for more is Michael McKay, former lecturer at the National University of Kyiv-Mohyla Academy. Good evening, sir.
Hello.
Let's start with this news of an Eastern Sentry NATO mission. It sounds good, but much of the support from the likes of Denmark, France, the UK, Germany appears to have in some way already been announced this week. So my question to you is, will it make a real difference on defence, or is this a public reassurance mission?
I think it's a public reassurance mission. It is repackaging things that already are being done or were announced that will be done. So I think it's purely reassurance. What I'm discouraged is that it is an internal message of reassurance and not a message of any kind to the Russian aggressors, which is what is called for at this moment. I think most policymakers who have been making statements over the past few days have been directing comments at their domestic audience and nothing at all towards the Russians that attacked Poland. And I'm very discouraged at this. I think the Russians see this as a sign of weakness and as a sign that their attack succeeded.
You bring me to my next point, because despite announcing this mission, NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte today refusing to call the incursion deliberate, is he right to be cautious here, or is he playing into Putin's hands?
He's absolutely wrong to be so cautious. And in fact, by making a statement like that, I would say he's being reckless, because it is not truthful. Poland was attacked. It was a deliberate act of war. We cannot say it was an accident. It was not. And to recognize that and to respond appropriately is what is called for at this moment. To fail to do so puts the citizens of Poland and every NATO country in grave danger. So I think Mark Rutte's comments are, in fact, reckless.
Across the Atlantic, we're hearing Donald Trump say, oh, maybe this drone swarm was a mistake. Then he says, well, no, we need to come down very hard on Russia. What does this umming and ahhing by Trump, again, do for unity in the West, and especially that of NATO?
It shatters it. In fact, today Trump said, I'm trying to quote him correctly, I'm not gonna defend anybody, when he was asked about Poland and a question that was referring to Poland's invocation of Article 4, a provision of the North Atlantic Treaty that requires allies to consult with each other when the security, sovereignty, territorial integrity of any member is threatened, which Poland's definitely has. So whereas the United States should be conferring with Poland and other allies, it in fact is doing the opposite. Trump saying effectively, I will not meet the obligations the United States has under the North Atlantic Treaty. I think a realist perspective is to treat Trump seriously with what he says, that he will not defend NATO allies, and just as we should treat Russia's attack seriously as an act of war.
How do you read the response over the last few days? If we look at NATO more broadly, is this a win for the European response, but ultimately a failure for NATO? I mean, Article 5, that clause that an attack on one is an attack on all, it's a NATO clause. It requires American buy-in. We haven't seen that American buy-in alongside European allies in recent days. So how do you read the response, and has the alliance, as a NATO alliance, failed to deliver?
The NATO alliance has failed to deliver. What we've seen is a failure of this formal structure that has more or less held the peace of Europe since 1949. And but what we have seen is informal alliances, which is the positive message. In particular, the support of Ukraine to Poland. And I think that is what should be addressed and taken most seriously now in light of the failure of NATO and the formal structures that it has.
Given your military expertise, let's talk about how sustainable the response was in Poland this week, because from what we understand, there's a shooting down of cheap drones, but by expensive equipment. So could a country like Russia, bleed a country's resources dry with this strategy of widespread drone deployment that need to be shot down by expensive equipment?
They absolutely can. And I think Russia will be very encouraged at the success of their attack. NATO forces only shot down, I believe, 4 of 19 targets, which is something like a 23% success rate with very expensive military hardware. So the cost-effect ratio is all off on this. Whereas in the same attack, let's not forget this was a combined attack on Ukraine and Poland. On the same night, Ukraine faced almost 400 drones and missiles and shot down about 93% of them, some by means as inexpensive as a 50 caliber machine gun. So the cost effectiveness ratio is all on Russia's side. They will be encouraged to send more attacks to Poland and to other frontline NATO countries, knowing there is this off-kilter posture in the response. They'll send more drones, more dummy drones, more electronic warfare spoofing drones. And now that they see that they can overwhelm a defense that NATO has that was meant for a completely different kind of war that's never going to happen, that's not facing the Russian terrorist state, which is what we really face today.
What does this all tell us about how prepared the eastern flank is, particularly when it comes to air defences? You mentioned the success rate there in shooting down those drones and compared to Ukraine. I mean, instead of 19 drones, what would happen if the eastern flank, not just Poland, but countries in the Baltics too, would face, say, hundreds of drones?
Well, the eastern flank is very strong if we consider Ukraine, and unfortunately Ukraine is excluded from NATO. But if we exclude Ukraine, then the eastern flank is incredibly weak. It's got a big hole in the middle of it. And so if I was a citizen of any Eastern European country that's a member of NATO, I would be very worried. I would say, as many of them do, especially given the posture of the United States, that we're in a position where we have to fight. We have to defend our country, whether the United States supports us or not. Ukrainians are used to that feeling. And now I think more and more people in NATO's Eastern European member states are coming to that realization as well. We have to fight no matter what.
You mentioned there that citizens living in the eastern flank and Eastern European countries should be worried. Is there something to take that is reassuring from the last few days? Something that you see as an element that has worked well, that proves that Eastern Europe can defend itself? Or Central and Eastern Europe?
That the armed forces of Ukraine are still fighting, that they are holding the line, that the Ukrainian air defense is shooting down hundreds of air targets a night, that Ukrainian defenders are hitting back on the territory of the Russian terrorist state, striking military and strategic targets, especially oil terminals, as we've seen in the last couple of days. That is the reassurance that people in Eastern Europe can take. The only fighting defender is the armed forces of Ukraine, and they are, until NATO gets some sense and retaliates, Ukraine is Europe's only fighting defender.
And lastly, we hear a lot about traditional defence spending on tanks, aircraft, howitzers, the list goes on. It sounds impressive, but in your view, is that investing in the war of yesterday? Are we working harder and paying a premium for these traditional technologies instead of working smarter?
Absolutely. Recently, the head of Ukraine's unmanned defense forces, their drone commander, talked about how with 400 men and 10,000 drones, he could eliminate an armored NATO brigade from 20 kilometers away. And this was very discouraging to NATO commanders because they know that it's true. So this is investing in the arms of yesterday. I think we see some countries doing the right thing. We see Britain becoming a co-investor with drone technology along with Ukraine and some other countries. But yeah, NATO needs to invest smart, which means unmanned forces, particularly, as Ukraine has done. But most importantly, adopt a posture of victory. What does it take to win victory over an adversary that is not the nuclear armed pure power of yesterday, but is a terrorist state, that is a armed criminal syndicate, and understand it in that way and meet the actual challenge that we're facing.
Michael McKay, former lecturer at the National University of Kyiv-Mohyla Academy, thank you again for your time.
Thank you.
And that's all for World News tonight. Do stay with us here on TVP World. I'm Aaron Darman. Good night.